Hello to everyone before we go live.
Is Sus there? Oh yeah, I didn't see him. Hey man.
I just joined 20 seconds ago.
Hello and welcome to this new edition of Friends of Tracking. And today we've got, well, some very exciting. We've got Ravi Raminemi from the Seattle Sounders, and we've got Devin Pleuler from Toronto, who are going to talk together with Javier and Suds, our normal European analysts. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between what happens in the MLS, how it is to be an analyst over there compared to how it is to be an analyst here in Europe. But I thought I'd actually start by saying a little bit about what's happened on the channel this week. So it's been really exciting, actually. We've had so much stuff. So I think last week ended with William Spearman's presentation, where he went through pitch control and how it works. And during the week, Laurie, so he couldn't be with us tonight because he's looking after his kids. He went through a number of steps about how to build up to the pitch control, first looking at and so on, and then building up towards building a pitch control model. So if you go in there, you've got a whole Python step through about building up towards a pitch control model. And I did a seminar yesterday, which is also on the YouTube channel, which you can look at. And that was from a Sloan conference paper that I wrote together with Fran and also with people from Hammarby and also with Xavier, actually, about how you can model the movement of players. So that's up there. Then we've got a load of interesting things coming up in the weeks to come. We've got Sergio Lana is going to do something on passing networks. He's just making a video and he's already put something up into the, I think he's putting things up into the GitHub about how you make a passing network. I have nearly finished some videos on expected goals because I think it's important we get some sort of basic models on expected goals up there as well. So they'll be coming out during this week or next. And then one of the really exciting things I've got is that Last Row, who do a lot of visualizations of goals using tracking data, they have generously, well, he has generously provided me with 14 Liverpool goals. And one of the ideas we're going to have is we're going to have a Liverpool analysis challenge. And so the idea will be that you can look at these, you can have these 14 goals, analyze them, do your own analysis, and then we'll have a little competition who does the best analysis. So that's going to come up in the near future. Okay, so with no further ado, I'll go over to Ravi and Devin, and I think I'll start, I'm going to let them present themselves and tell a little bit about their history before they both give a short presentation about what they're up to with analytics just now. So I'll start with you, Rav, and if you could just say a little bit about your history, in particular, how you got into sports analytics, what you started doing, and then a little bit about your role within the club just now. Thanks.
Hi, David. Thank you very much for having me here, and thanks, Javier and Sudarshan as well. I started my sports analytics career about 7 years ago. Prior to that, I was a software engineer / program manager at Microsoft. And then I moved to the Seattle Sounders in 2013. It was a long story, but this is something where I was interested in doing, working for a football club, soccer club, and was looking for opportunities and started writing blogs and putting myself out there. So a mix of luck and serendipity and all that stuff, and I was able to get into the Sounders. And the first couple of years I was setting up infrastructure because there was only Excel spreadsheets on someone's computer. There was no infrastructure. So I put some infrastructure in, and initially most of the data I was dealing with was fitness and sports science data. And I created a pipeline to structure the data, add some more context for for the GPS data of, breaking it down by exercises. Now this is all commonplace, but I think 7 years ago, it was pretty new. I set up the data pipeline and then set up reports on the front end that coaches and fitness coaches, and they can do the reports. And also was doing some analysis with to look at injury risk and fatigue levels and all that, using all the data that we used to collect from the players. Towards end of 2015 and 2016, early 2016 is when I transitioned into more of performance analytics, technical, tactical information. Started with Opta data, and then we got some tracking data after that. So along the way, I've got myself into helping our recruitment and scouting side, as well as working with our coaching staff to prepare for the next opponents, as well as also working with president of our club to help him manage the salary cap and try to find ways to get players in. It's always one thing that happens is, in terms of analytics and data, we look at a lot of players, hundreds of players, but in the end, it all comes down to dollars and cents and which player we can bring in at what price. And it's not like in Europe, where if you have X amount of money, you can spend it the way you want it. In MLS, there are different buckets of money that you can only use to buy or sign certain type of players. So it makes it a little bit more complex. So that's where I am right now. So I work with scouting, I work with the GM, the coaching staff very closely, and also I help the sports science whenever they need me.
Good. I think we're going to come exactly back to that point to do with budgets later on, because I think that's a really interesting influence on analytics as well. One thing, maybe I'll just ask you one more thing, is the fact that you came from a blogging background as well, because when we had our first discussion, I think none of the people, Javier, Pascal, Suds, or Fran, had any experience blogging and doing this online, but you and Devin both had that background as well. How did you start with that?
I think it also shows that 2013 and 2012 is very different from 2020 and 2019, because I think it's the world has evolved and online has evolved and everything is different now. So at that time, there was very few. There's even now, I think there's very few ways to set ways like, oh, you do this course, you do this X, Y, and Z, then you can go apply for this job at this club. There is no such pathways. So you have your own pathway. And one of the ways that worked at that time was you put yourself out there, what you can do, show people what you can do. Okay, I can take this data and this is how I can draw some insights from it. I still have my old blogs out there. They probably sound pretty bad right now, but at that time, that's how you came in, and I think over the years, all the initial bloggers have all been hired. Like, I am very, very inspired by my wife, Sarah Rudd, who is the VP of Analytics and software at Arsenal, and she was the one. We both used to work in the same group in Microsoft, and she was the one who was a couple of steps ahead of me in this game. So I just followed her. Like, okay, she started blogging, then she got a job. We went to Sloan together, and that's where I came back from Sloan. I think it was March of 2012. I quit. I gave my 2-week notice to Microsoft. I didn't have any job lined up, but I was like, okay, I need to try this seriously and give it some time. And I was in a position to do that. That's also very important to know, acknowledge. And I was able to, like, okay, I can survive 6 months without income and try to get this done, or try to get ahead of this. And that's how I got it.
Great. I've been pestering Sarah, by the way, to try and come on to this, but she hasn't answered any of my calls, so or emails. So just
I think,
to let you know if it wants to be passed on.
Yeah, I know. We talked about it. I think it's just that. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I know. It's complicated.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. So, because one of the first blogs I ever read about football analytics was from our next guest. And I think you'd written about, I think it was about the Women's World Cup, and you'd done a passing network, which I found really inspiring. And I wrote about in Soccermatics as well. But I won't take away from your own presentation of how you got into it. But let's hear about how you got into Devin.
Yeah, it started a little bit before that, I suppose. So I'm a computer scientist kind of by trade, and I played soccer at a relatively high level, and by that I mean largely rode the bench in college. So, and unfortunately, I'm just a 5'9" goalkeeper. So there was a ceiling to my career kind of from the beginning, unfortunately. But kind of post college, I started finding Opta data online, right? And essentially, I, without a job at the time and a lot of free time on my hands, I started scraping that data off the internet. And sooner or later, Opta, instead of suing me, hired me instead, which I'm very much appreciative of. This was kind of, I guess it's 6 or 7 years ago now. At Opta, essentially I was our analytics department was only just the 2 people at that time. It was myself and Sam Green was my boss, who, is probably credited as, the, creator of expected goals, at least in this kind of modern form. So that was a really exciting time to be at and around Opta. I worked in the New York office. He worked in the London office. And essentially there I was a consultant, effectively for clubs around the world, but also did a lot of projects with the MLS league office. Anything ranging from coaching analysis for certain teams in Europe to helping MLS understand the quality of their play and benchmarking against other leagues. As it's a league that's trying to grow, right? And from there, I love that job. It really got my feet wet. I also, was blogging quite a bit at that time. I had my own blog for a while, using that data that I had, I gained through certain means from Opta. But then that, transitioned into a weekly blog at MLSsoccer.com, where I covered the league. From mostly kind of data angles. That stuff is still mostly online. A lot of it is really bad. But I do want to, just as we're kind of talking about blogging, it is still, I think a legitimate route into these positions. I think it is being able to write an effective blog that is consumable by the wider media, the general audience, right, is really not that different from your job inside of a club, right? The people that you'd be talking to aren't people that are necessarily they don't really have a technical background or really have an understanding of anything more than a spreadsheet, right? So if you can kind of explain those those complicated technical concepts through soccer language, right, you can be effective, right, whether it's at a club or it's for a blog, right? So it's a good training, and it's good to put yourself in the shop window. But after my time with Opta, which was great, I had an opportunity to come up here to Toronto to join Toronto FC, starting as their manager of analytics. And that was 5 years ago now. I guess this was just the beginning of our 6th season, my 6th season. We've been fairly successful, and unfortunately, Seattle's gotten in our way a few times. Otherwise, I'd have 3 championship rings on my fingers. Instead, I have just 1, unfortunately. But it's been a great ride. And it's been fun to go along it with Ravi too, because I think we've been contemporaries in a lot of senses.
Yeah, I think that's something I should have mentioned right at the start, that you've been in 6 of the last 4 finals, which I think is a really nice statistic to try and get your head around. And so I think we'll talk a little bit about your rivalry there afterwards too. So the next step, oh yes, I'm going to just have a little look over at what Toti from Sketch Your Life up to over here. She's been introducing the background to who we're going to have talk today. And we've got her back. She's been sort of poached over to Barcelona Innovation Hub and has been doing things over there, but she's going to be following the Friends of Tracking and introducing and writing about what we talk about today. Great, so now I'll go back to you, Devin, and you were going to present a little bit about a very exciting project that you have. And I don't know if you got inspired by us or if you had thought about this for, I mean, you must have thought about it for some time, but you've produced a lovely GitHub repository called the Soccer Analytics Handbook. And so please tell us a little bit about what you've been up to there.
Yeah, it actually very much was inspired by you guys and general thinking around, this time in the world. I wish we were meeting under much different circumstances. But it's been, this shutdown has been really quite interesting for people in, I think our positions specifically, and I want to ask this question of Ravi later, but what's been quite interesting during the shutdown is, the coaches no longer have a lot of week-to-week sort of stuff to do, right? And suddenly, their attention is getting focused in a much wider range of projects and things, right? So in a sense, it's actually become one of the most busiest times that I've had in my 6 years here. That combined with all the new tracking data we've gotten in MLS this year has made a really quite exciting few months. But also during this shutdown, a lot of what you've seen through like you guys with the Friends of Tracking, but also all over the Twitter kind of soccer analytics world, you're seeing all kinds of new resources that are being built and shared, and it's a level of sort of community that I haven't really seen since back when Ravi and I were just kind of getting started, right? It's a sort of the characters are a bit different and the people involved are from different places, but it's a really exciting time in terms of sharing, which has been really cool, and that definitely inspired me to build this sort of a handbook for different soccer analytics topics. Now there's a lot of stuff out there in terms of how to get a job in sports analytics. Sam Gregory's put together a couple really good ones, right? Blogging is talked about a lot as a great path for putting yourself in the shop window, as I mentioned, but also kind of learning the some of the softer skills that are required for getting these sort of positions, right? And unfortunately, getting a job in soccer at this point really isn't based purely on your ability, right? It's mostly coincidence and luck and the connections that you might have developed by chance, right? And unfortunately, this industry isn't quite a meritocracy yet, right? And the people that got into these sort of roles, I think very originally, myself included, but also if you look across basketball and baseball, some of the first people into some of these clubs with technical backgrounds tend to be sort of generalists, right? People that are have enough of a sports understanding on one side, but then like a lot of the research papers that Javier writes, I can't understand the math of those, right? So like I can very much kind of sit in between. And as we're kind of the first ones in there, and we're very lucky to be there, I think it's our responsibility to a certain degree to help this industry become more of a meritocracy and to help bring other people into the game along with us, right? And I was seeking to kind of create a resource that wasn't as much about how to get a job, because there's quite a few of those things out there. It was more about like, what do you need to know when you're in there, right? What are the different things that I think are worth learning as an analyst, whether they're different software packages or programming languages or visualization packages, right? Essentially it was a bit of a brain dump of a lot of a bit of a consolidation of a lot of different emails and sort of recommendations that I've given to students over the years. I've written so many different kind of versions of the same email and Twitter DMs, right? That I felt like I should put it all in one place, right? So I
mean, I get lots of these emails, but I don't answer them with a whole load of Python code. That's pretty impressive.
Well, yeah. The Python code was more the fun part, and I think the part of the reason why a lot of this sort of blew up to a certain degree, it definitely got a much stronger reaction on Twitter than I was expecting. But yeah, it's there. It's definitely very much, and I have it up next to me just so I can reference it if I want to. I very much recommend Python. I know that other people on this call use different languages. I do think it's a great first language for people to learn if they're really starting from scratch. It's you can get yourself up and running in an hour, I think, and it's so extensible that you can use it for really heavy lifting stuff. All my web servers run on I use Django and Flask a lot for different internal projects, and that's running on Python too. You don't have to go that far out of your sort of base with Python. You can just you can do the stats that you need, and you can do the web stuff that you need, right? You can go cover the whole sort of stack, so to speak. But I suppose one of the more exciting bits of that analytics handbook that I put together, I think, were the Jupyter notebooks that are hostable easily on Google Colab, which you should check out if you haven't. Essentially, I put together a 4 or 5, 5 so far, different Jupyter notebooks, which are using the freely available data from StatsBomb, which we're highly in debt to. That's another thing that I find is really quite interesting about this time in the soccer analytics community is back 7 or 8 years ago, we didn't have any publicly, at least technically available data. And now we have all of this from StatsBomb. It's an incredible resource. And now we have some of this Metrica stuff coming out too, which I think is fantastic. But this, the notebooks, revolve around, different sort of concepts that I think are important if you're, like, say, if you're stepping into a job in soccer analytics, right? And it goes from kind of data extraction and transformation through, basic regression stuff, clustering, database population. And I have a few more that should hopefully come out in the next couple of weeks when I manage to find time. But one thing I did add today, which I think is cool, is I made the GitHub repository kind of pip installable, such that you can, and added a module in there so that you can very quickly pull StatsBomb data from a competition season right into a pandas data frame. And it's hopefully other people can collaborate with me on that. That'd be great. I'm very open to pull requests and make this as large as you guys are interested in making it, right? So hopefully with sort of initiatives like this, we can start to create standards, right? And that was another kind of problem, I think, 7 or 8 years ago, when all of these people were getting their sort of first jobs in soccer analytics. You walk in there and there's no real precedent on how to approach this, or how to think about certain things, or how to do certain things, right? Everything you were doing was kind of novel, right? Where now at this point, there's enough of us that have kind of gone through the tough first few years in these sort of positions, and we can start to talk to each other through mediums like this to help sort of develop, not just kind of intellectual standards, but also like what's the best way to approach this from the literal code perspective, right? And I think being able to share some of that stuff. I don't really view this stuff as competitive advantage stuff. I see this as foundational stuff. Yeah. And I'm not going to lose anything if other teams in MLS start using this notebook for getting themselves up and running. If anything, it might help me. So that was kind of the reason behind this. I hope to grow it some more. I'd love it to become a larger sort of analytics community resource. And I've already gotten 3 or 4 different pull requests adding different resources and packages and things like that. And the more I can get those, the better.
No, that's fantastic, and I think it's worth saying from our perspective that what you're doing is more rigorous really than what we've been doing, is putting up a lot of code and going through the teaching thing. So we're trying to look at the intellectual standards, but what's very nice is the rigor that you're doing that with. There was one thing I wanted to follow up on that you said, and I wanted to bring Suds in a little bit on this, because he sent me this. You sent me we were looking at a few videos about how to be a data scientist. And you had a brilliant quote. I don't know if I want to read out your quote, so you should say it yourself, Suds. But you said something brilliant about these videos online about how to be a data scientist. And you're going to repeat your quote.
No, fine, yeah. No, effectively, I think the resource that you put together, and I've slowly been looking into it, is a lot of these like 1 million YouTube videos. They basically are just 30 seconds long, and they say how to be a data scientist. 1, have data. 2, do science. Thank you. Can you click the subscribe, like, and I'll see you next week. And so it's been pretty cool to see the evolution from videos like that to what we're actually being given now. And I think through the combination of work that you've put out through GitHub, through what Friends of Tracking is doing, and hopefully with the inclusion of Laurie and David, we can create some sort of this meritocracy, as you're saying, a sort of accredited solution or an accredited course that allows people to say, you know, I've done the coursework or I've done the training required to be effective within the club. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm just really happy that we're all on the same page regarding that.
Well, I think I wanted actually Xavier to say a little bit of it, because I think that was the things that impressed me very much when I first talked to you, is that you said to me something down the lines of that you wanted all the other clubs in La Liga to get better as well. And that follows on from exactly what Devin said, that it kind of pays everybody if there's improvement in analytics across the league. Maybe not too much improvement, but some level of improvement is needed by everybody.
Yeah, I think that maybe something that is misunderstood, or that's the way I see it, and probably it's because we compare soccer with the current state in baseball and in basketball, and there are similar sports in some things, but there are different sports in the end. Is that because of the nature of soccer and what's being done, and that you only have data of high quality since the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, or in the best case, 7 years. I think that in clubs right now, the competitive advantage is coaches and the game analysts and the physical coaches and the experts and the football experts the club has. In analytics right now, you can provide lots of information, and you can aid a lot, big parts of that work to try to create a data culture. But football is not naturally it's not a sport where the data culture has been born naturally. So what I think is that, at least for the next years, I don't know if this is going to be the same ever. I think clubs, I think people, I think companies, I think everyone that is trying to do something in analytics in football should be willing to share, because the truth is that there's lots of things that are being repeated in many other clubs, in many other places. There's lots of work that you can save if you know from very smart people. That, I mean, there's always going to be a very big group of smart people that is better than you in lots of technical and non-technical subjects, right? So I just see that I don't know. Probably any area in science has evolved through sharing, through being open in those kind of things. Of course, you have a competition between companies and the cutting edge stuff, but I do think we are in a state in which we need to share as much as possible, because there's a second thing, that is analytics jobs in clubs at least are not safe or like a secure job for years and years. It is a long-term project, and clubs have to see it as long-term projects. But if you talk with people doing analytics in club, they probably don't feel like very safe and saying like, yeah, I'm gonna work here 30 years. The most common thing is like, at least I'm here now, maybe I can last 1 year. So if you can use anything that any other one has to say to make you provide as much as possible to the club right now or to the community in general, I think it's better. And just to answer what you said, or to continue in that idea, is that at least the main, if there's one important thing in football, is that football is for people to get entertained and to watch a sport, and the most important part of that is that it has to be competitive. So we don't want to win La Liga with 500 points, or that's not even possible, but with the top points. You do want to have some competition. You, of course, want to be first, but you need to be able to provide a competitive ground, because otherwise, I won't say this sport is dead, but it's pointless, right? Then you need to create new competitions to get there. No, so I think that many other leagues in many other places, in comparison with some of the European leagues, are getting ahead in what you can do with analytics, and maybe some of the leagues that have top clubs are not realizing that. So that's what I mentioned once, that we really want, at least in Spain, in which we have more contact with clubs, to help as much as possible to try to share what we know, because in the end, going back to the initial idea, the advantage is with your coaches and analysts and the people in the club right now, and people that can communicate with players, and in the end, in players. And maybe in 5 years that changes, but we need to get there as quick as possible.
Great. Yeah. I think with that, I think it's perfect actually to go over to Ravi, because you've got a different type of initiative, but valuable initiative. And you're going to say a few things about the conference that you're organizing in Seattle. So please.
Yeah. First of all, I want to congratulate Devin and, and also all of you guys, like just starting these various projects like this, where we're sharing what we've learned, and so that the people coming next don't have to go through the same steps or dead ends like we've been to. I think that's a really good project, and at some point I would love to contribute as well in any way possible. So one of the things that we've done at the Sounders for years is it's also another way of sharing information and how we did things. We invited we invite some guests from other places and have like a small conference. We started with sports science, which is in its 9th year now. It even predated me joining the club. It was small then. Now it's like very, very big. We always keep the number of attendees about 100, 110, 120, to just so that people can interact and everybody can know everybody else by the time the 2 days or 3 days is done. So last year I added an analytics conference to this, and last year was the first year. Devin came over, Devin talked there, and it was a successful event. We had a lot of good speakers. We had, I think, David Steele from Liverpool, the champions of Europe, and a few others. And it was really good. Like, the reception was great. Obviously, now we can't host any event like that. So what we've done is that we've done two things. One is to do it online. So doing it online is going to be hard we have to also adapt the format. So what we've done is that it's going to be a 3-day event, but 1 day per week for 3 Wednesdays. And then, like, one of the advantages of this situation right now is we have to take advantage of it, is that there's a lot more people available because they're just talking from their home. There is no travel. There is no issues in it like that. So we were able to get a lot more people that we probably normally wouldn't get. And then the other part is this whole event is going to be completely for charity now. We are going to charge $50 per registration, and all of the proceeds will go to the COVID relief fund that is basically funding local businesses and small businesses and affected people in the Seattle area. So I have a small couple of slides that I'll go through.
Yeah, sure. I think you can screen share there.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah, good.
Okay. So yeah, so obviously just quickly going through. So it's so I mentioned the times here. So it's almost impossible to have a good time for all the world because soccer is a global sport. So we made sure that the biggest, England and Europe are covered, and that's also not just because we have any preference. That's the time we can get the best and the most interesting people to talk as well. Even though 11 p.m. CET is kind of pushing it, I've had some back and forth with some of the speakers. And as I said, the $50 registration fee will go all towards our relief fund, which is already, we'll have details on the registration page. What it does is that it has already distributed the first set of funds. The way it was seeded was our ownership group put in like a big seed money, like I think almost like $1 million. And then I've asked local other people to contribute into it. And so then they were matching some of what is being put into that pot. And we've distributed the first set of distribution to the local, like small businesses and some affected places, some affected groups and entities. And now the second round of funding request will happen in the coming weeks. So this is something that's already being used, like the money is already being used. And we also, one of the things we're trying this year, which I wanted to try last year, but timing was an issue, was like we're doing like a small competition of data visualization. And it's geared towards more college students and people that are data enthusiasts, not people that are working at the clubs already. Because I think it's try to get more people into this and get excited or try to do something and show off their skills. And the data sets, there's a lot, as Devin mentioned, and one of the greatest things that has happened due to COVID is people are sharing generously data, technology, algorithms, everything. So there is so much there to start off. It's not like you just go find some idea and do something. There is data, there is even like I saw Laurie's tweet thread today, and he has the pitch domination, how to do. And so it's like, it's probably took, I don't know how long it took Will Spearman to do it. It might have taken him a couple of months. Now it's out there, everybody can do it. If you just have to plug in your data into it. So I think that's amazing. And thinking about it, and as Devin mentioned earlier, when we got into this, it was really so hard. And I tried to start at the time, one of the big inflection points at that time was Manchester City releasing like one season's opted aggregate data. It's not even about XY locations. It's more just somebody had so many passes and so many were forward and so many were like successful or unsuccessful, things like that. We started, one of the blog posts I used to do every week was trying to get the links of all the people that have done any work on that in the last week. And it was, at that time, it was really hard. It was just that piece of data that we had. And I think now there's a lot more for people to go around and try to find like data as well as technology to bootstrap them. And that's why we started the competition and explicitly mentioning that it's for beginners and people that have enthusiasm in this area, not professionals already. It's about, so the main topic of the conference is integrating analytics into the decision-making workflow. And the different speakers will be coaches, analysts, executives, and people that work in football at different levels. And the idea is that how do you integrate in your day-to-day job, and what are the limitations and gaps you think exist today, and do you have any solutions or ideas on how to fill them? It's a broad topic, but I think it's a very, very much the topic we fight with every day or struggle, or that's kind of the job description. Like you're always trying to get better at this. And the goal is to bring out constructive dialogue and see how we can improve between the various stakeholders at the club that could use this. How do I sign up? We are literally like hours away from posting the page for registration. And if you follow any of the Sounders channels or my Twitter account or the Twitter account of the Sports Science and Analytics conferences, you will see the information, the link to it. And I will send the link to David and he can post it on the YouTube later today once I have it.
Cool. That's really good. Thanks a lot for that. It's just amazing how everybody's doing these different initiatives, actually. And I think that sounds like a really good idea to sign up for that conference. And here, I mean, I think it's going to be much broader than just the, I don't want to say this word nerds, but just the data analyst types of people. It's also going to involve quite a lot of the people who are making decisions within the clubs and how they see data as well. And I think that's really important and something that stretches a long way behind what we can offer on Friends of Tracking, I think.
Yeah, I think, you know, like obviously, as you said, it's there's more breadth there. And also that is something that we always try to get, we're trying to expose is that there is, you know, how are all these people perceiving analytics today? And what do they think is missing? Or, you know, and then you have a dialogue between the different groups. I also have some really nerdy presentations in that, but
That's
not, but not like, but not the whole conference. And I think, you know, it's a good mix of people and from like across the domain of football.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely be getting our technical director to have a look at that as well. I think that's it sounds very good. We'll have a quick look at how everything's been captured in drawing here. It's a little bit out of focus there. Wow, you can see creating standards in bold text there. Python, I like to see in bold text. That's very good. There we go. Data visualization competition. Yeah. I think that's another way. I like the idea of having competitions to get people motivated to do these different types of things. It's not always about big prizes or anything, but it's quite a motivating factor to get you going and find your own project to solve things. So I think competitions are very important.
Yeah. Also, to add something quickly in that line, David, is that of course the typical recommendation for people is, I mean, and what Sat's commenting about, you know, the intro of how to be a data scientist tends to be very basic, but of course, a very good way of starting is actually starting like an online course or trying to do some projects or you know, even get involved into a master. I know people doing like online masters, working a lot, but learning a lot. So I say this because what Devin said about the availability of data is very interesting. I mean, something I tell to everyone that is starting now to program or to try to learn data science and so on is that it's really hard or not really, you know, thrilling to do the typical, you know, computer science projects like let's build, you know, a database for students in a university, and you have courses and degrees. That tends to be boring. So if you like sports and you like football in particular, now you have availability of data, and you can basically transform every possible project you have learning how to program or learning basic things or more advanced things in data science. You can tailor that to football problems and to get that to your data. And nowadays, it's very common that universities or people or courses allows that very easily. So that will be a very entertaining way of learning a skill, and in the same time get started to actually do things in football.
Oh, I think that's very important, that the whole of data science has really changed a lot. That I mean, I teach at the university, and I learn more from my students now than they learn from me, I think. You know, they come in with some new library or some sort of application of something every week, and it's just incredible how much it's changed. And there's so much you can learn by yourself and I think this is what the competitions is very good for. If you focus on a project and start thinking about how you want to solve that project and work towards that. Yeah,
and there's sorry. Please, Ravi,
please.
Yeah, so the other thing is that I think sports data is very harmless in that to experiment, and you know, you're not going to kill anyone if you do analysis. or I think it's a really great way to get into modeling or analysis. Maybe in the end, like at the end of the day, the number of sports analyst jobs is a very, very, very small subset of the overall data science or analyst jobs. So these skills that you can gain while having fun with your favorite sport can get you a real job. And and at some point you'll probably find a way to get into sports. And that's always the advice I give to people that ask me, or students that ask me, how do I get into soccer analytics? And like, don't narrow your focus into soccer analytics right at the beginning. Learn all the skills, and then you'll get a chance at you will keep looking, and you'll get a good chance, and something that fits what your profile is and what you want to do at some point, and then you switch over. Because I think there is always this thing like, oh, I've done this, I don't have a job yet, and I always find that very difficult to answer. And one last thing about the conference is that, so we do have suds presenting there. So I just wanted to announce that. And so yeah, we've now checked the nerd box.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think that's very good about what you're saying about modeling football. I mean, every morning I wake up and I start building a COVID-19 model, and then it saves me really, because then I realize, no, don't build a COVID-19 model, do something else instead. It's not going to help anybody. Get on with modeling football. And I think it keeps me sane actually to think in these types of ways. Yeah,
there's something extra, again, very quickly on the idea, because I always wonder why it comes so oftenly, the idea of write blogs, right? And get there. So I think that the immediate thing that you can think about that is that people is telling you, make yourself noticeable, and then your name is there. But there's an extra thing that I think that you can really learn from that. And I'm going to connect two things. The first one is that data science is typically about solving problems and actually asking questions about something that is relevant. And typically, actually, you and me, David, talked about something earlier and we agreed that the technical implementation of whatever is inside, which is the technical side of what is most commonly promoted on data science, is typically not the most important one. The most important one is what you actually are inputting there and what do you want to solve. Because otherwise, and you can, with very simple models, produce very nice solutions if you really have a good idea of what's going on there, and then you have to communicate that with real people and so on. So something interesting about blogging, now that I think about it, is that it might I never blog, and I'm not good at summarizing, as you can see. But the thing is that something that can really provide you is actually trying to put in words, and in simple words, and in a few words, some very complex problem that you want to solve. It doesn't have to be a complex per se, but when you start writing that, you're going to realize that there's a lot that you assume in your modeling or in your data science process that you haven't thought about. And then if you're able to actually communicate that through words in a time of life in which people only want to read 2-minute articles, then it could be a very challenging task. And if you are able to do that, then you're going to be training yourself to actually do that in real life. And many of us probably didn't have the chance or the luck or the whatever of training that beforehand. And then you probably realize now that it's an important skill to learn.
Yeah. I think the revelation has finally come to you, Xavier, after all this time, that blogs do have a lot of value in that type of way.
And yeah, it also teaches you a bit in terms of how to take criticism as well, right? And also criticism that is slightly, maybe not coming from the perspective than you expected, right? You might find that you're not writing for the right audience or something like that, right? So it lets you kind of understand how to have the same conversation in different ways, and be able to kind of modulate yourself based on who you're talking to and make them at ease with this sort of topic.
One other example on that is that I've used this in my previous presentations, is that the complexity, as you know, as Javier mentioned, on the data analysis side, or the work that we do, and some of what Devin just mentioned too, like it might have taken you hours or days to build a model and come with an output from the model, but the actual message for, you know, I work a lot with coaches and the players. The actual message that goes on to the players is finally, hey, you know, I'll tell you the simplest expected goals message: don't shoot from there, shoot from there. That's all it is. Like, that's kind of like, don't shoot from so far out, you know, try to take another touch or go inside or find another guy to pass to and get to a better location. So that the final message is always simple, or wait till certain trigger happens, or keep the distance between the two center back and the right and the full back. Don't ever go far beyond 20 meters or 20 yards, or, you know, whatever the number is. So I think, so that's kind of that's where you're distilling millions of rows of data and coming to 2 lines of English properly written sentences about what is it that we want out of this. Like, in the end, like the final message. So we can't get, we can't, you know, and then the criticism part comes there, is that when the message you give is not useful or is not deemed useful, then it's natural to feel the frustration that, hey man, I worked a weekend and I worked a full week to produce this analysis, but you're telling me this is not useful. And you know, so that's sometimes it probably is the wrong reaction from the decision maker, whoever that is. Sometimes it may be, he may be correct, that maybe that output is not good as well. So you have to be, I think writing it, putting something out there in the wild just to get some reaction will get all kinds of reaction, and that's always good.
And I think that brings me to one of the questions I have. Sorry, Steve.
No, I was just gonna make a quick statement. Is I completely agree with that. I remember one of the quotes that I heard from a friend who was at Hull at the time, Hull City, and what he said was, and he was a sports scientist, and this is even true, even more so for data scientists, was he said that you are a monkey and your whole job is spending your entire career learning how to talk like a lion. And I find that really fascinating, is because in a sense, all of us probably have our technical ability much more sophisticated than our language ability. And hopefully that could be one aspect of what we try to do as a group, is we try to not only show the technical aspects of this job, but then also how you translate. Maybe there's instead of Google Translate, there's a Friends of Tracking Translate of, okay, this is what the coach says, this is how it is mentioned or operationalized in data science speak. This is what a data scientist says, this is what a coach wants to hear, this is how the coach would like it translated too. I think it's a super, super important piece.
No, I think so. And actually, I'd really like Ravi and Devin to both expand on that a little bit more, because my impression is that it's more hands-on, your work in MLS. And I'd like to hear a little bit about how you work with most directly, and what sort of inputs you can have and what influences you can make on what happens more on a daily basis than on scouting, I think.
You know, there's you know, what we kind of work on and who we're dealing with very much depends on, you know, kind of where we are in the season, right? You know, are games going on? Are we in the off season? Are we during a pandemic? You know, is the transfer window open? Is the transfer window shut? Right? That all kind of depends. Those are the primary variables in terms of, you know, deciding what you're working on and who you're working with. You know, for us, you know, I imagine, you know, MLS clubs are quite a bit smaller than, you know, our European counterparts. And I get to deal with, I sit next to our head of scouting, I get to, walk over to our, head coach's office whenever I'd like and have a conversation, right? It's very small, where I don't think that that's necessarily the case, just in terms of size or even culture at a lot of European clubs, right? And because of that, it allows a lot of, cross-departmental collaboration, right? And very much I view, analytics and the analytics department as not really a department, right? It's a conduit for, having, sports science talk more efficiently to the, to the coaching staff, or having our executives communicate more effectively with our scouting staff, right? We're very much glue people. But also because we're glue people, we're not necessarily decision makers, right? So while we are, frequently in the room when decisions are being made, right? We're only a piece of the puzzle. But it is really, really very cool, just in terms of how I think, we're obviously one of the larger budget MLS teams, but I still feel like we're run very much like a startup, right? There's people with their, hands in a lot of, what's that expression? I forget. Hands in a lot of pies or something. Like there's a lot of people doing all kinds of stuff that are maybe not necessarily directly in their skill set or what they're hired to do, right? And I think of Ravi a lot here too, right? Because he started on the sports science side and is now more on the, or does a lot more of the tactical side, right? So you have to be, there's a lot more opportunity, I think, over in Major League Soccer for that kind of, cross-departmental sort of stuff. I'm not sure if that jives with your experience, Ravi.
I think a lot of it I agree with, and obviously the little differences, but like as you mentioned about being able to walk into your head coach's office. My office is between the president's and the head coach's office. So and I got an office because I convinced them that we need, like, for me and the video analyst together, we need like a place where we can get players in or coaches in, make that like an idea hub and discuss things. So that's where we spend a lot of time, and that's where I learn a lot. And I think my understanding of football when in the before I joined the Sounders and now, it's just night and day. And the way I watch football is also very different. And so what we do is as I said, we have a big TV, biggest TV in the building. And so we bring in every now and then, if the coaches wants to bring in like a position groups, defenders, attackers, and they want to show something, specific clips to them. And I'm always there listening to them and, and understanding what is it that the information is being passed. And I work a lot with our assistant coaches. I think in most coaching setups, like they are like doing a lot of work. I think head coach has a lot more, I think, communication and, a lot more other duties as well. So you are working a lot with assistant coaches who have a big input into what the training drill is going to be, or how the training drills are going to be, and what are the things. And we have a lot of conversations about metrics, and sometimes they turn into long arguments, like hours and hours. But it does lend itself to, like, for me, understanding more and try to get my metrics more contextualized to a point where it's more closer to what the coaches are also looking at when they evaluate a game or a player. So day to day, not talking about scouting, the morning is the training part, when I get my time, when I'm in my office and I'm working with our video analysts, like getting ready for the next, whatever it is. We're usually 2 weeks ahead of preparation, which is, I think, standard in most clubs. And once it's the afternoon, when the coaches are done and they have their post-training meeting, usually one of the assistants or two of them, they come up to our office, and then that's probably the best part of my day, is that I've done whatever I need to do on the computer. And after that, just listening to them and whiteboarding things and trying to understand, okay, this is what we're trying to do. I was giving an example earlier, like before we started the recording, that when the final came about, when we realized it's going to be Toronto, the first day we came and the thing was that our assistant coach Gonzalo Pineda, he was like, okay, let's look at with their players, what are all the different formations they can come up with, what are all the different tactical setups they can come up with. And it's like, and then we drew this up and it was just like 6 colors of names, and just, it was a jumble. Like, if I look at it now, I'll feel like, okay, what is this? It will take me a few minutes to understand. But as we drew it, when he started writing it, okay, this is what I think, this is one option, this is option 2, this is option 3. And then, you know, you start to understand, then you're building on top of it. By the time, it's almost like the sketch there. When you see at the beginning, it's a lot more, when you see it being drawn, you understand every part of it. But if you see it maybe 2 weeks down the line, it will take you 10, 15 minutes to understand, oh, this is what happened. So that's my day-to-day. And then obviously, as Devin mentioned, you know, during a transfer window or before or after transfer window, there's always like specific things that come up. You know, a lot of things for me that always come up is that I get an email from our president at I don't know, 3 a.m. whenever he's awake, and he says like, this guy at this price for this many years, this guy at this price for this many years, how does it work? How does it work in the salary cap? And then I have to go, and then I have all these financial models, and it's like, okay, if we get him for this money, that means that this is the money we'll have next year, and this is what we can do. We can't do this contract, we can't do that contract. And if we have, and then all these choices come up, and then the other part of the day-to-day during transfer windows is I spend a lot of time with that, is working with our president, like saying, okay, this is the pros and cons of this, signing this player, not just on a performance side, but what it will mean for us on the budget for the next few years. Or does this mean it will make us financially inflexible to make another signing in the next window? And then you're always looking at also who are the players that they have expiring contracts or they might move on, like, you know, so yeah, so that's the other part of day-to-day, but it's only during certain parts of the year.
That's a good question, which you don't have to answer if you feel uncomfortable answering it, but is it a problem if you're doing this day-to-day working with the players and you're also sitting there doing scouting to potentially replace that player? I mean, do you feel it? Is there any sort of awkwardness in those types of situations, or how do you deal with that type of situation?
I think it is very, I mean, it is something that I just try to compartmentalize every part. Like, you know, just when I'm doing this is what I'm doing. I think everybody realizes, I think in MLS, for example, a lot of the player contracts. So in MLS, there's 3 types of players. Well, there's more, but I'll leave the complexity. There's 3 levels. One is the DPs, designated player. That's the player that only hits a small percentage of his salary on the salary cap, 12.5, small percentage, let's say. And then the team can pay any amount of money to him. Like Latan was making 7 million, but it was only hitting the salary cap at 500,000. And then there is what we call the targeted allocation money, TAM players. These players are players that are a little below in the salary range, but they make about 500, about 600. And the number varies every year by 10%, 12%, because the salary cap keeps going up. So let's say about 500,000. So there is a set of players that are making between 500,000 and 1.5 million. And then there is the rest of the players that are making anywhere between the minimum salary, which I think in the new CBA is about 85,000, to 100, to up to 500,000, the limit for the TAM. So I think, and a lot of the players, other than the DPs and you know, to some extent TAM players, all other players are all player options. So sorry, are all team options. So the team has the option of their contract, whether to renew next year or not. sometimes it's guaranteed for next year, but then after that it is not. So I think everybody knows how this works, and there is a lot of churn in almost every team in MLS every offseason. So I think some of it is kind of known, that everybody knows that this is the business. The other part, I do agree with you that it is difficult. And sometimes I've, at least in the beginning, I had to put a lot of effort to compartmentalize everything.
And that's what makes scouting so cool, I think, in Major League Soccer as opposed to other leagues, right? You're not just searching for the best player that you can find, because, for the most part in Major League Soccer, you're not dealing with perfect players, right? If it's a perfect player, they're more likely playing for Javier over there, right? So you're searching not just for a good player, but a good player at a certain price, right? And adding that sort of interaction term makes the whole problem space a lot more complex, right? And a lot more, exciting, I think, right? And it makes you, I think, look at players in a much more critical way, right? It's no longer like, is this player good enough for Toronto FC or good enough for Major League Soccer? You're suddenly asking questions like, is this player good enough for a senior minimum contract for this number of years or something like that? It really changes how you scout, right? It's like if you're scouting for a DP, it could be anywhere in the world. Or if you're scouting for players at the bottom end of your contract, or you're looking at college soccer players in the United States, right? So it actually makes it an impossible job for scouting departments, because you have to watch soccer at just every single level, right? And then also keeping tabs on your own academy as well, right? So it's a really cool feature of the league, and it also helps keep the league competitive too, right? It's a competitive balance mechanism, right? It does seem that Ravi and I have seemed to luck out in terms of gaming it a bit, but we'll see. I think with the fallout of the coronavirus stuff and us not really knowing what this world is going to look like on the other side, I imagine that other leagues will start to adopt this sort of model, because it is more financially responsible, and it could actually provide analytics departments with greater influence inside of clubs and outside of North America.
Because I can't help but notice this, because I mean, if you have these financial constraints and everyone's got the same financial constraints about what players they can bring in, and then you do this with that, you've got 6 out of 4 finals. What else is there other than the analytics which can describe that type of success? Maybe you, I don't want to push you on that. Well, I do want to push you on this.
Your analytics department, yeah. I mean, your analytics departmental budget doesn't go against the salary cap, right? So that's great.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you have anything to add there, Ravi? Or
yeah, I think it's more. I would say I think if you look at the organizations, both Toronto FC and Seattle, and there's a few others. It's not just the two. I think you can see by the way the organization operates and how they, if you ask our GM or our president, Garth, he will say the words that come out of his mouth are evidence-based decision making. Like wants to, wherever there is, when there is information available, we want to use it to make a decision. And I think it's always, and I think Devin mentioned earlier, is that we have a seat at the table, but we're not the final decision makers by any means. But they, my input goes into the decision-making process. And that's ultimately in any decision you just make, whether it's signing a player or it's completely different on the business side, where you just want to use all the available information. Why would you not use it? And I think that's just the ethos that I think we try to foment, or we try to practice. And we won't be correct all the time. We won't probably do it the right process all the time, but at least we know that what is the right process and what we're trying to replicate over again. I think that's probably what I see. Like if you look at the Sounders, like they won championships, like the US, before I joined, they'd already won 3 US Open Cups in 4 years of their existence in MLS. So, and in the last 4 years, we've won 2 MLS Cups, and it's just that, and been to 3 finals. It's just that the culture, and I think there are a lot of times I always wondered, when I joined the Sounders, that the reputation was they're a really good regular season team, but they don't really win the playoffs. And MLS Cup you win if you win the playoffs. And then I saw 2014. I thought was one of our best seasons. We won the Supporters Shield, which is the number of points, most number of points in a season. And then we lost to LA Galaxy, Bruce Arenas, LA Galaxy of Landon Donovan, Robbie Keane, in a very hotly contested conference final. We lost on away goals. And so to me, like, and then now it seems like since that season, and since we won the 2016, right now I can see the difference, because I've been in the organization when we were supposed to be not a winning team, even though we won the regular season. But now, if in the last 4 years, we won the MLS Cup and gone to the final 3 times, and there is always like, okay, now I see about Seattle is that, they will somehow find a way to get there. And inside the organization too, the difference I find is that I think we are very, I would say stable, or just, we don't tend to react to a bad streak or a bad set of results, or like, okay, it's just the sky is not falling. Okay, we know we need to get this many points to get into the playoffs. We need to get the team ready to be at that time and to peak at that time. Obviously, this may be a different scenario for someone like Javier, where it's a more traditional, or for you, it's a more traditional league setup where you have to be consistent over 38 weeks or 34 weeks. But I think it's just the kind of the culture, I think, is some of it. And then like just the mix of like, okay, the culture of making good decisions. We won't get all of them right, but at least we know what is a good process.
Quick question for both you and Devin, because I know I've had a conversation within the WhatsApp group, especially with Javier, about this. Is how much of your transfer market analysis, when you think about these designated players or the allocation players, how much of the analysis is mainly around running polynomial regressions or hierarchical clustering to identify kind of the aging of a player's career, to understand kind of the right combination of age with the senior level or the tier of the contract that this person should be getting, the number of years and things like that, versus knowing what your game model is and finding players that fit that game model? Because it does seem like the MLS does have this sort of restriction that, that David, Javier, or I don't. And so I'm just curious if it also changes the amount of time you spend in certain type of analyses.
One funny thing that you'll notice with Major League Soccer, when you start to do player ability models, and you look at age, you see some really very bizarre effects. Because there's a bit of a survivorship bias in terms of players in the league, right? If a player is over, 32 years old in Major League Soccer, it's because they're a really good player, right? But the problem is when you're sticking, age in as a variable into some of these models, it starts to load as a positive feature, right? Which is really quite funny, because look at Zlatan, look at Rooney, look at all these sort of aging players that were still quite good by MLS standards at the end of their career, right? And then throwing on top of all of the survivorship bias in terms of players that have gotten to that age in their career, there's a reason why. So actually looking at age from a quantitative point of view is really very hairy. We, at least for us in terms of recruitment, analytics will feature in more at this sort of high level sort of thing. You'll look at, we're looking for a player that kind of fits this profile. Let's filter this list of, 500 or 1,000 players down to a list of 30 players, and then let our scouts, kind of go from there. We could, sometimes we'll get back involved at the very end of that sort of process in terms of, trying to help provide alternative perspectives in terms of if this particular player fits a style or something like that. But for the most part, we try not to, we try to just help out the scouting department. We don't try to replace it in any sort of way, right? There's and that's led to a really collaborative relationship with our scouting department.
Ravi, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think age is something that we look at as just a filter, and then mostly we're looking for a positional fit or the tactical, what is that we want from him, and then we try to get obviously we have the event data for most leagues, that event data is collected. And then obviously we try to see if we can get some physical data from, if we know anybody at some of the clubs that the player has played at, or the most recent club, and then try to see if we can do something there. As I said, age is depending on, again, it always goes back to the equation that you have to solve first, or about what is the money we're going to spend on this player, or which part of money is going to go to spend on this player, and that dictates some of the age filter. Like if you're looking at somebody that's going to be mostly on the bench, and just so then maybe the age criterion maybe will relax a little bit more, because we want to find somebody in that price range. But they're going to pay the top dollar, or is going to be one of our highest paid players in our budget, then we will make that more strict and look for specific range of ages. And most of it is based on all the prime age for different positions, whatever the research is, we try to look for if we can get, but always we end up with, again, we end up with choices at the end where, we like maybe 5 players, of which one of them is couple of years older than the others, but maybe that's the only player we can afford at the end of the day. So it's those things will happen later on, and that is something that's the scouting department. And then we and as Devin said, at the end we get into the process again for some final analysis, looking at it. This is usually when we have the final 5, and before that sometimes we also get, I think it's pretty common, I think, is that you do get some names, the scouting department or the sporting director, even if you don't want, from agents, and then there are some agents in MLS that are very savvy about the MLS rules, and so sometimes they could save you time. Basically, it's one of those where that they basically look at every team, and they're trying to understand, oh, these are the players I think will you guys are looking for, or these positions or something. It's a hit or miss. It's not. So I get some names like that as well, and then I put them into my analysis and say, okay, these guys, of the 6 guys they've suggested us, maybe one of them is interesting, or 2 of them are interesting, and then we try to kind of then evaluate them as well.
And that's probably one of the more interesting differences, I think, between Major League Soccer and some of the larger leagues over in Europe, just in terms of how players are identified. One big difference I've noticed in my 6 years here has been just how players initially get on our radar, right? 5 or 6 years ago, back when MLS was still kind of a bit of a Wild West, right? Agents would reach out to you, and you would do analysis on those players from there. Then you'd start watching them and things like that. Whereas now, what analytics can help you do is have due diligence on those players before the agent gets in contact with you, right? So you already have a data set of a season or 2 of that player's information right at your fingertips. So you you can act a lot quicker in some of those instances, right? It allows you to do that first, round of due diligence, automatically, right? So when that, agent phone call or email comes across our scouting director's desk, right? There is a baseline of knowledge, right? They've, maybe he hasn't watched that player, but we do have some basic understanding, right? Whereas, I imagine that's quite a bit different than how, some of the, larger clubs might operate.
So that brings me to one of the questions which I most want to ask, because I think, what do you guys think that, we'll take all four of you actually. What do you think that we can learn in Europe from MLS? What's the most important thing that we can learn from how things are done in the MLS? In terms of analytics, of course. Devin, you seem to be thinking hardest, so I'm going to put you on.
Sure. I think it's, just the proximity that Ravi and I get to work with actual decision makers is probably a big part of it, right? And the fact that our club very much operates as a startup in a lot of ways in terms of culture and things like that. You don't need to be a huge organization to do some of these things right. And in fact, some of the older, larger clubs have such kind of cultural inertia that sometimes it's much hard, it's a lot harder to integrate analytics into some of these older clubs. In fact, it's quite probably quite a bit harder to integrate it at a club like some of the largest clubs in the world, as opposed to an MLS club that has has a 2 or 3 offices in an entire building, right, where there's only 20 people working there, right? It's a lot easier to change the culture there. So, I think there's some value in being lean. I'm not sure if Europe can learn from MLS in terms of like getting lean, but it's definitely, I think, kind of an unforeseen advantage that MLS clubs have over some of these more established clubs, is that we're a bit, because we're smaller, we're a bit more nimble and agile as well in terms of being able to shift our focus and our approach. So yeah, being as much about, being as much like a startup, just like how our league is kind of a startup, right? Is definitely a good mindset to have.
And is there more of a, if it's like a startup, is there a sort of better culture? I mean, I don't know, I don't want to, I put values on different cultures, but I mean, there is a very macho culture in lots of football clubs, and there's no getting away from that. And is that sort of different in US clubs, do you think, or is?
I don't think it's very much different. In fact, I think that there's a certain North American soccer inferiority complex that doesn't like to embrace new things. But at the other side of the spectrum, also data and information is very much part of the North American sports culture, right? So you kind of have the data people are led in the door. The question is, how much they're listened to, right? It's a bit of a kind of conundrum, I suppose.
Ravi?
Yeah, I was gonna say we gave you soccer instead of football, but that's. but I think MLS, as some of the points that Devin said, I think startup. I think being a lean organization and just having to work, I'd say startup, one of the big differences working at a startup and working at a big company is the constraints, the number of constraints you're working with, and also you are wearing multiple hats sometimes, doing different things. And I think that gives a lot of, that is something that is useful. For example, I double up as a translator sometimes to our Spanish-speaking players because the regular translator is not in, or he's busy with translating for another guy. So things like that are very very, and I think I can't speak for all the MLS clubs, but at least because I've only been at one, so I don't want to make that like as a trend, is that the access and there is less barriers, I think, between departments or between people doing different things. I think it's not that hard for me to get access to players. But that doesn't, but also that comes with a lot of responsibility that I can't abuse that, or I can't use that for something that I shouldn't be, and I always try to have a coach with me when I'm trying to talk about, like an assistant coach with me, when I'm trying to talk about like analytics or something that some messaging I want to give the player, because I just want to make sure that it's a collaborative thing. It's not me trying to change or, just me doing something on solo. So I think there is all that, and I think it is definitely, and the other thing, the startup comparison is that it's all like a small family.
Mm.
So, and I think that makes it a little bit more like we all know each other really well, and I think that personal element adds some more in terms of trust when you try to get across a message, or and the other part I think is also very important, is that there is still a lot of players or a sizable amount of people at the club, not just players, that are not on very, very high salaries. Like, I think if you go to Europe, probably in a football club, there is a lot of people that are making a lot of the difference in the money they're making. Like, let's look at players. Like, most European clubs, the players are making a lot higher than the staffs. But I think in MLS it's probably a little bit closer. And I think that's another thing that maybe is another aspect of it that's easier for us in MLS. Makes it easier for us.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Right, so I'm gonna go over to a lot of stuff there. I was wondering, I'll go over to Javier first, and then Suds, and maybe respond to that, and think if you feel that you can learn something from the MLS. You know what these guys have been working with for some time. What are the main take-home messages for you guys?
Yeah, I think that's something that, at least when you speak about analytics in sports in general, coming from the US, a common comment in Europe, in particular in Spain, is that there is a difference in the cultures. And I think that the difference comes in from the big whole country. I think that America tends to be, tends to believe in data, or be like really, event. How was that? Ravi said that, like, evidence-based guidance for companies and for the country in general. It's not that Spain is not using data, but it's not something that is immediate to think that we have to add technology or to add like a science-guided perspective for anything that there is, right? So what I'm saying is that the success of the analysis and data in baseball, in basketball, and probably in many other sports, it's clearly coming from America first. And I think that everyone thinks it was natural that MLS adopted that. But it's very interesting what Ravi and what Devin says, because what they're saying is that, yeah, it might be natural from a cultural point of view, but it's not easy, because you have clubs, you have to behave like a startup, you don't have immense budgets. It's going to be challenging in any ways. I actually feel connected, or like I feel similar to what to many things they say, because we actually behave as a startup within like a very big company. Well, we're very, very old. We have hundreds and I would say now, and 20 years, I think, or more. And so 226. So the thing is that the club has a big history, and it does behave or it does have the characteristics of a big company. But at the same time, we are a group that behaves like a startup within a company, in terms that you have to move fast. You don't have an immense team in which you always have the resources to do things. And our challenge is a bit different, from the sense that do need to win every week, and you basically try to add something of value within an environment that is full of experts and full of very top talented people in many areas, and it's just not one, there are going to be many. So you really need to make sure that you can actually add value to them. But the good part is that even though being a very big company, I do feel that within the club, the harmony and the closeness of people is very high. I mean, you do feel like it's a football team. Actually, it just feels like a team working that. But of course, there's many people or many more people in many different roles. So it's harder to get to every possible people involved in different things. It's interesting to see there are many many scenarios or many contexts that that has to do with with the environment of where you're working. But I think that from the sense of analytics per se, and actually bringing that to football, the challenge is similar, because basically data is not attached to football, and basically you need to become good at saying important things or valuable things in simple terms, and it's really hard to get the data you actually need to. I mean, the ideal data for doing I mean, for transfer market for player scouting is actually tracking data for every possible league, and you don't have that. You need to get around with the data that you might have. So it's interesting, because I think it's more the things we share than the things that are different from MLS and top leagues in Europe, and that's why I think that if we keep sharing our common problems, we probably can make football better and all learn more about the sport than actually competing or actually gaining some special advantage for just one club. Yeah.
I think I will. Tough to say something new that has been said, but maybe from a cultural perspective, I feel in European leagues, we are a week-to-week type business. We need to win every week. But I think one thing that we can learn, and I hope someone doesn't see this stream and fires me, but in the Iberian Peninsula, in Portugal and Spain, there definitely is this overreaction to a streak of negative results. So it's not necessarily about the data, but it is about having this like calmness about if there is a streak happening, it's okay. We do need to win week to week, but it's not something that we need to panic over. And the reason why I say that is I think one thing that could be a cultural difference, because I used to work in the US, maybe not in an MLS club, but I used to work in the US before coming to Portugal, is I feel in the US, you could, wouldn't even be criticism, but you could maybe give a bit of like a contradicting opinion to someone else, or you could give an opinion that challenges the worldview of someone else, but you would be able to grab a beer with that person late that same night or that same day. And in the beginning, now it's not like that anymore, but in the beginning it was very much like that. If you brought in data or a evidence-based result, even if it agreed, or even if it was more or less in line with what someone already thought, or a technical staff already thought, or a video analyst already thought, they would immediately say like, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you trying to say about my work? And it's one thing that maybe in the UK and the US, the culture there is a bit more like, okay, if you do have opinions that are different than mine, let's discuss it. Even if we might get into a bit of an argument, it's okay. Like we can still go get a beer later on that evening. And so maybe that closeness that Ravi and Devin speak about could be something that's learned. At least at Benfica, we are very close. At least I feel very lucky to be close to the CEO and very close to Rui Costa, but I'm close to him in physicality. I'm definitely not close to him in mentality or status or anything like that. And so sometimes that kind of creates a bit of a dynamic that definitely I think we could learn from US based or UK based organizations. And just to piggyback off of Javier's comment, it almost does feel like that is right now, if you think about 20 years ago, 15 years ago or so, the physiologist or the nutritionist or the medical doctor, they weren't always required to hop on the team bus or the team plane to go to an away match or even a home match. I almost kind of feel like a sense it's not the end goal for the work that we do, but I almost kind of feel we are in this stage where we collaborate together across different leagues as football data scientists unite to kind of get this industry to the point where the sports data scientist is considered as someone that's like, okay, yeah, this person needs to be on the team bus for the next away match or the next European League match or whatever, the next playoff match in the MLS. Not saying that that's the ultimate goal, but once we do get there, that's maybe when the fun really begins and where we start to really see the competitive advantages diverge.
That's great. I did want to wrap this up, but I just wanted, following up on what you've said, and this is sort of particularly to you, Suds, there's one question that came in here from Vinny Warrior. He was asking, how often do foreign candidates get hired in data science roles? And is local knowledge indispensable? And I'm just thinking what impresses me about you as an individual is that you go and work in Portugal and you fit into this culture and manage to sort of still keep yourself as you are as a person. I think I don't know you that well, but you keep yourself as a person, and you sort of have a very high level of self-respect and so on, and you communicate that way rather than like suddenly I'm Portuguese or something like that. Maybe you wouldn't be able to achieve this, but maybe you can just say a few more words about that fitting into that culture.
Yeah, well, to answer Vinay's question, I would hope that foreign candidates can get hired at roles. I think even Javier could speak a little bit about this because he does know Spanish, but there is definitely cultural differences between knowing Spanish and knowing Catalan. But what I would say is it's a breath of fresh. Maybe in the first 6 months or the first season I was at Benfica, I was scared shitless, and I was definitely like, man, what did I do? Took a massive pay cut to come from Microsoft to Portugal. Everyone, it's a very masculine culture, of which I'm much more on the shyer side. So I was like, oof, I don't know about this. But what I found was the most beneficial thing to be a foreign person within a football club, and maybe you can even think of a football club as a magnified version of the culture of the country that you're in, is I think everyone really appreciates a breath of fresh air, and everyone really does appreciate a different perspective, even if you might butt heads in the beginning. And everyone really respects if you stand your ground in that sense. So I think it took me a year to really, similar to Ravi, just do the data integration, the automation of reports, and, in a sense, just prove a little bit of my worth. But after that, I really felt free to just be whoever I naturally am. And it was this breath of fresh air, this personality type that I am that is different than what you normally would find in Portugal, that was then turned from like what is this American doing here to, oh man, this is awesome that we have him. He lets us think in a different way, and he lets us see things in a different way. So for me, I always see differences as strengths, or I always see different perspectives as strengths. So I would hope that in the future, clubs definitely do look to hire people that aren't necessarily that locality. It's possible to learn the language, and if that person is dedicated to the culture, it is also possible to learn the culture, the subtleties of the social norms. So there is maybe a little bit of work on that foreign person part to be able to fit in the sense of being respectful and mindful of the country that they're living in. But at the end of the day, I do feel in this world that we live in, hopefully post-pandemic, is different perspectives are in a sense a competitive advantage.
Anyone else want to quickly follow up on that before we shut down.
I would love to hear about Spanish versus Catalan.
That's too controversial, I think.
Not at all. I mean, I think it's really natural, and things. I mean, it's not such different languages, and you can move around. You need to be. I mean, if you're being a data scientist in soccer, you need to be able to learn things and to move quickly and to learn lots of skills that you probably don't have. And parts of those skills can be language. Parts of those skills can be behaving within a new environment which you don't know how things works. Trying to provide value without interfering with people work, actually trying to, I mean, when we talk about creating culture, is not imposing any kind of thinking, but actually providing the idea that there's a new way of, there's an extra thing that you can use to enrich the information that you might have. And you have people with certain expertise that are not typical in football environment. So you can use that to increase the amount of information or the quality of information that you might have. But in the end, there's such a big pipeline of information and different types of experts trying to add up into the place of, providing the best environment possible to players. And then players have to decide when they get to the field. And there's a critical thing that is, we typically talk in terms of growth, right? More people doing things and more technology and so on. But in the end, you need to present there as few, I mean, the fewer things as possible. I mean, very, very specific information. So that's a challenge for clubs that behave as startups, for big clubs, for intermediate clubs, for clubs that are just starting now, for clubs that started years ago, because how do you add up things without creating noise, without actually providing some value? That's pretty challenging. So I think that in the bottom line, you have to be very, very able or very willing to adapt, very willing to learn, very willing to, to have lower salary than you could have, whatever thing is your current state, because it's going to be different in many clubs. From one club to another, you need to be able to adapt and to change and to suffer a little bit in order to provide something to the sport you like and you love, right?
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Wow. Okay. Thank you all for another mammoth session where we covered nothing to do, I think, with the initial questions, but lots and lots of interesting topics. So fantastic. I really enjoyed that. I think Totti's just finishing off the final details of, it's amazing how you always manage to get it onto exactly 2 pages. And that's the cue I use, that it must be over now. But it's fantastic. We've covered everything from culture to openness and sharing data with each other. Lots of scouting came in there. We've steered away from scouting in everything that we've done up to now. So it was quite interesting to start to get a glimpse into that scouting world. So it's just for me to say thank you very much for participating this evening. And oh yes, we'll be back next week. I'm actually trying to line up Pablo, our assistant coach at Hammarby, is going to come on and talk about how he experiences having analytics in their work. And I'd quite like to get another coach on there to do a discussion. So we can talk about that later, but I think we'll have a bit of confronting analytics with coaching staff next week. So if you are a coach and you'd like to come on and talk about that type of thing, I think we'd like to do something like that. So we'll do that next week. And then in the week after that, we've got the Sci Sports people are going to come and talk about expected possession value and so on. I haven't really thought through exactly what we're going to do, but yeah, those are the 2 weeks coming up. And thank you very much for today, and bye-bye.